Howdy, y'all. Welcome to another episode of Redneck Lesbian, starring Brad Sunday.
Hello.
Today we're going to talk about mental illness in the LGBTQ community and the weaponization thereof. And of course, there's legitimate, real issues to do with mental illness. I just want to point out at the get-go here that homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder in DSM in one form or another until the publication of DSM-3R in 1987. The diagnosis was first removed in 1973, but a condition called Egodestonic Homosexuality remained in the manual until 1987. And that is defined as having a homosexual orientation that is at odds with one's idealized self-image or ego. And I interpret this as basically being, yeah, I'm gay, but I am so homophobic towards myself that I can't bear it, kind of thing. So Brad has had some experiences with mental health issues in the system. And Brad, why don't you tell us your story?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say that, that what you just said about, the internalized homophobia thing.
Yeah.
It's so funny because now I'm 54. I've been out since I was 17. Although it was no surprise to anybody, right? But I realize I still have a little bit of internalized homophobia, which is really weird to say because I remember, I always knew, always.
Sure.
And people would ask me, even in the context of like Rocky Horror fandom back in the 80s, where that was like a safe haven and everybody was gay or bi, but I just couldn't deal with it. I was like, oh no, I'm not gay. How can you say that I'm gay?
I know.
I just couldn't deal with it. And then whole different thing, but then I got, that hot minute that I was involved with the Assembly of God, Bethel Church. Hello. That really took me back a couple notches. But then when I finally came out, I was like, fuck everything. And I totally came out. But I had a lot of denial and a lot of self-loathing. And even a couple days ago, I was going through something, regarding my mental health. I've been dealing with my therapy right now. I've been dealing with a lot of recurring dreams. And I've had recurring dreams and recurring nightmares my whole life. They always change. But I'm going through a new cycle now, and I've been dealing with that in therapy, and it's been coming up with stuff. And I was, talking about it to my therapist, and somehow in trying to figure out these dreams just the other night, I was like, when you lay in bed and you're like kind of in a meditative state and kind of not, and your mind is just going and you're real deep in your mind. Well, I was, going through this thing of like, it kind of sucks that, I'm 54 and I'm alone and I'm probably ain't gonna never find another lover, but maybe I will, but who knows? But going through this thing, it's like, well, if I wasn't so gay and I wasn't so Nelly, but I am, and I can't help it. But then I think about like my sexual abuse and my constant bullying by my peers and my dad. Like I always had this obviously gay thing going on, right? But my dad constantly telling me, you're always walking around here acting like a goddamn skirt, on top of molesting me when I was little. How's that gonna work to make me more macho, right?
Yes,
and I always
wasn't dealing with his own shit.
I always wondered if I became so feminized and Nelly because that's what I was told and that's what was expected of me. And is that a valid thing? And that's not even a fair question, especially now in this conversation nowadays with, gender identity and
right.
there's so much acceptance and discussion about people identifying as they and them, which I don't.
Right.
But I'm just wondering, like, how much of this is natural in me and how much of it is because of being bullied, that I was forced to be this way. Not gay.
Right.
But you know what I'm trying to say. And I hope I'm not derailing the topic, because I think later, because I'm going to bring it into something I'm going to talk about in a minute related to the system and everything. But like, what I thought about that over the years, and I thought I was over it, but I was just thinking about it the other day. Like, what's your take on that?
I think that you are who you are, but I do think that people pick up on things that even you aren't aware of. For example, I never thought of myself as gay. Oh no, I'm not gay, I'm straight my whole life. To be clear, I really identify as bisexual, but that's too confusing for some people, so I say lesbian. But you know, I got hit on by lesbians for years, and I'd be like, no, you know, and I had no problem with lesbians, but it's just like, man, that's just not me. And then later, you know, I realized that no, I've actually been kind of like this, very masculine, very dykey, actually, my entire life. And I just wasn't ever okay with it, because of course I knew here that it was not acceptable to my family or to anyone I knew for me to be that way. So of course I wasn't going to be that way. You know, it was really this fundamental form of self-denial. So whereas you kind of understood all your life, I was just, and I had lesbian experiences as a young person, you know, as my first, but I thought, well, that's just normal exploration. And, you know, wow, self-denial is just a really strong force. But I do think that people pick up on who you are. Like lesbians was like, you look like you could be a lesbian, you know, and they were not wrong. But, you know, but being, that's not the same thing as self-acceptance, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. And I don't know that, like, before, like, I wore it as a badge when I was young, when I first came out. And I think that I definitely became more outrageous on purpose. It's just sort of like a fuck you to society. Like, that was my way of being punk.
Yeah.
Like, I was never like, you know, the macho punk with the mohawk and kicking some ass, you know. My punk was being as Nelly and as outrageous as I could.
Was that also a fuck you to dad?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But that's not also what, I mean, for me, it's definitely authentic for people to live their lives. Like, I mean, totally. I'm not saying that it's not, but for me, that wasn't authentic. That was like a period.
Oh. Okay.
And then I was coming into this period. It's like, well, what is valid for me as a person? Because I don't want to dress like that anymore. I don't feel that way anymore. I don't want to present myself as that anymore.
Right.
And I always wonder, like, how much of this, like, hyper Nelliness is conditioned and how much is sincere, you know? And maybe I'll never know. I'll know when I die. Maybe I'll got, you know, I believe that we get this of understanding, and maybe I'll get it. I don't know. And does it really matter? I don't know. But it's cost me relationships. It's cost me friendships. It's cost me sexual encounters. I mean, I've literally had people come over and say, oh my God, you're so hot and you're so attractive, but I could never have sex with you because you're so Nelly.
Wow. Well, maybe.
And I'm not meaning to derail anyway, but I'm just wondering, like, psychologically, is, you know what I mean? Like, how does that work with me? Is it a reaction to trauma, a reaction to being bullied, a reaction to everything that it was like a defense mechanism to feminize myself?
I think so. Well, I mean, but I also think it's a difficult. I think that the conflict within you is because whether it's probably just you That's what I think. But I think the conflict arises from this barrage of, well, that's not okay.
Yeah, maybe. And I guess I've just never,
But that's the whole reaction to homosexuality, the whole spectrum of it, and transsexuality in general is like, some people have just decided, well, that's just not okay. So.
And it's funny. So anyway, getting back to what we're talking about, but I think this is related. In fact, I was watching, it's funny that, how synchronicity works in a weird way, right? I was watching, I'm a big Law and Order SVU fan. And I was catching up on the most recent episodes on Hulu last night. And I had watched this, this episode of, molestation of young boys and yada, yada, yada. And this relative had molested this kid. And it was like a one-time anyway. But what really struck me is he broke down and he started crying because it had turned out that he had been molested from the age of 9 up until later. And, he was crying and crying and crying and saying, I deserve to die. I want to die because this happened to me and I never dealt with it. And look what I did. But with that, that doesn't resonate with me, that experience, but you know what I mean? But what did resonate with me is like when he came out of his suicidal funk and he was like, yeah, I need help and blah, 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 blah. And, Detective Benson was like talking him out of his suicideness and, and he was like, it just doesn't matter. I've been dead since I was 9.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me. And it made me cry because I felt like I've had this, leading into my therapy and basically I've wanted to die since I was about 10. I used to tell people all I want out of life is nothing. All I want out of life is to die. And that started at a really, really early age. And it resonated with this, this fictitious character in an episode of SVU. So I always had like suicide ideation. I always had depression, bad self-esteem issues. It's all revolving around my dad. And I'm not going to get into details about that because that's out of the scope of this. And I don't necessarily want to go there, but you can use your imagination, right?
Right.
And so I remember when I eventually what happened was I got thrown out of the house because the abuse went from, it was always emotional and mental. When I was young, it was sexual. I say young, meaning like really young. But when I started developing a personality and I started fighting back, it just became emotional, verbal, and physical, not sexual, but physical. And I eventually got kicked out because the last time he punched me, he threw me up against the washing machine and I dug my nails. He had his shirt off because of course he did, because he was a pig and he was always had his shirt off and was always walking around naked. And he would piss in the sink with company home with the door open to the bathroom.
Nice.
Yeah, people don't believe that. Yeah, that happened.
Oh, I can believe it.
Walk around naked in the backyard to sunbathe with my grandmother here. Yeah, he was a piece of work. I'm actually, part of me wants to laugh because it's so outrageous, but at the time it was anyway. So I dug my nails into his neck and I clawed.
Good.
And he had cuts from here to here. And I got a steak knife and I held it in front of his face and I said, if you ever touch me again, I'm going to kill you, fucker. He never touched me again. And about 3 weeks later, I got thrown out.
How old were you?
17.
That is usually
that was the beginning of my therapeutic journey. because I'd gotten kicked out, just graduated from high school. I had just started college. I'd never had a job in my life because I didn't need to. And, you know, back then, I mean, it's normal for kids to have jobs in high school now, but back then, or at least in my little chunk of suburbia, that was just not normal. You know what I mean? And maybe that's privilege or the times or whatever, but I never had a job. I didn't know. And all of a sudden I was like, what the fuck am I going to do? So I ended up moving in with my aunt, being really, really depressed, of course, you know, because I'd lost my home. I didn't know what I was going to do. Anyway, I got a job. I continued on in college, blah, 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 blah. But in that depression, I finally realized that I needed to start therapy. So I talked to my mom and opened up for a bunch of things. And she said, okay, I'm going to, you know, let's get you some help. We're going to pay for this. Fabulous therapist, right? But then I moved to a different town to go to another college, right? And I found the worst therapist I could have possibly found. She was a homophobic old cunt.
Oh, great.
And she's still practicing. I just looked her up not even that long ago, and that woman is still practicing, but she's not a therapist anymore. She's a social worker now. And I shudder to think. Can I say her name? Probably not. I'm dying to say her name. I won't.
Probably best if you don't.
But anyway, this woman, she clearly didn't like me. I would say things, and she would literally be like, and I would say things and she'd roll her eyes.
So
and
your parents choose this woman?
Standing up for myself was a really difficult thing, and it was very therapeutically important for me, right?
Okay.
This bitch never taught me that. What taught me that at the same time was I had just gotten into tarot cards, and that had taught me standing up for myself was important. So the last thing was I had lived in this hippie house in Santa Cruz, which was fabulous, right? And there was this old fart artist that used to live there it was all college students. But then there was this old guy who was probably my age now, you know, this failed old hippie with a no art career, you know what I mean? It was just the poor thing. And I mean, I did like him. He was a creative, interesting person, but he was just a grizzled, grouchy old fucking couldn't deal with us young people, right? And anyway, it had all come to a head one time. We had this meeting of the house, and I decided that I had to move out. And I had found another place, right? And so I had told this therapist about this. And I said, you know, I'm moving out. I can't deal with Russell. It doesn't even matter. No one knows who this guy is, right? Can't deal with Russell. He's just so judgy and just such a grouchy old coot. And he was like telling us all that, you know, we can't have friends over, and our music is too loud, and we talk on the phone too loud, and it's interfering with his artistic process. Which, right. And, you know, and I was like, I just decided to move out because it's just like making me uncomfortable in my home, and I'm just not going to tolerate that. I pay rent here, and I'm just not going to tolerate it. To me, for me saying, I'm not going to tolerate that, that was a big fucking thing for me, right?
Yeah.
You know what this bitch said? She said, oh, you're not going to tolerate it. Well, doesn't that make you feel like a little big man?
No, it means that you've established healthy boundaries.
That is what my fucking bitch therapist told me. You're not going to tolerate it.
Who chose this woman?
Me.
You did? How long were you seeing her?
Oh, God, only about 6 months.
Okay.
And after that, I found another therapist. And you know what? I saw her 3 more times after that. And then I ditched the bill. Because screw her. Isn't that terrible? But she was old. It was the times. This was 1987, very homophobic time.
It was.
And I knew that she was a big old homophobe because every time I said anything, she literally just, oh, she just didn't like any of it. Like I wasn't in my place.
Yeah. So,
So boom,
was, is
mental
that,
health system failing me right there, right?
so was that, I wouldn't know, but based on your experience and your friends' experience, is that a pretty common thing for therapists? You know, a certain percentage of them are just going to be homophobic assholes.
I don't know because everyone I've had since then, well, I've only had, this was 87. When I moved to Texas, I had a therapist I had for years and years and years. Really loved her.
Mm.
And then after my second hospitalization, which we'll go into, I had another therapist for quite a while that I really like. And then I have one now that I really like. So no, that's only been my only experience. So I don't know.
Okay.
But I consider it, I mean, not to be ageist or whatever, but her age in 1987, that generation, plus the times were so homophobic.
I graduated high school in 87 and
Yeah, it was just, I know, me 85, so you totally know. So it was just, that was just a bad time,
yeah, it was.
But that was the first time that I felt like the system had failed me, right?
So
But then
what
after
happened?
that, I had good luck. I had a really, really great therapist that I adored for a long, long time.
Good.
And then several years after I stopped seeing her for financial reasons, my first suicide attempt, took me to the hospital. They were going to put me under 72-hour watch. There was no bed for me, so they just sent me home.
Failure. That's a failure.
About, let's say 5 years later, second suicide attempt. Got sent to the hospital. They put me, I was in the mental hospital for 3 days. But it was literally, they just bring you in and they say, here's your room, here's the common area. They brought me into a panel of about, I don't know, 6 psychiatrists, counselors, therapists, I don't know. I mean, they were all nice. Everybody was really, really nice. But they asked me all these questions and I told them, and of course you're not really honest 100% when you're in the setting, of course, and maybe I should have been. But, I basically, told them what was going on. Oh, okay, well, we'll get back with you later, go to your room. And I had maybe one-on-one for like 20 minutes when they were deciding what to do with me. So they decided to put me on Wellbutrin, which is useless when you're that in a crisis.
Tell me about it.
Totally useless. But basically for 3 days, there was some meditation classes, like one a day. There was a yoga class, like one a day. Other than that, me and all the people that were in this facility, we were just left to sit in the common room and stare into the air.
So it's kind of, it sounds like a glorified timeout.
Yeah, and it made me realize, because at that time I was working in a nursing facility, and I was like, oh my God, now I know how my residents feel. Because basically they're just left here to sit here and stare into the air 22 hours a day.
That would make me nuts.
And there was nothing to do other than, I mean, there were people there that you could talk to. And I became friendly with this one kid who we ended up playing board games together. And that's the only thing that got me through it. And this poor kid, his wrists were scarred from here to here.
Oh my.
And he had literally been in and out of that place. He had told me like 5 or 6 times. And he had been there, and he'd been there for months. because he was waiting for a bed in the state hospital because they finally realized that he actually needed help. And I was like, well, what are they doing? Do you have counseling or whatever? And he was like, oh, like once every couple days I'll have a session. But other than that, I just sit here waiting to go to the state hospital. And he's like, I know when I go to the state hospital, because he'd been there before, all I'm going to do is sit and stare into the air.
That would make me depressed. You know, so if I were depressed already, that would not help.
But this poor kid, that had been like the 5th time he'd been there, and he'd already been to the state hospital before. And he was obviously, something was wrong, because he literally had scars like this long of knife scars. And he's like, oh, I'm going to go to the state hospital. I don't know how long I'm going to be there, but I know I'm just going to sit there and stare, and they're not going to do anything. They're just going to give him pills, and they're not going to do anything. And that was my experience. They didn't do anything. And they were just like, oh, well, you know, we called your number, you know, the numbers of people that you gave us, and you weren't entirely honest with us about your level of depression and stuff. And I was like, yeah, no, I wasn't, because I just wanted to get the fuck out of here, because I know I'm just going to sit here and stare into the air, right? Well, you really need help, and, you know, we really feel like, you know, you should be here longer, and blah, 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 based on what was told. But, you know, your mom's flying in from California, and so, you know, when she comes, we're just going to let you go, and here's the phone number, and please get help. And fortunately, I did. And I got to say something good for the University of Texas medical system for low-income people in San Antonio, Texas is fabulous.
Nice.
The mental ward at UT Hospital sucks, because you just stare into the air. But they put me into this program that was free, by the way. I had a psychiatrist that listened to me for drug stuff, meds, you know, and we worked out a cocktail that worked for me. And they also gave me a therapist, and they paid me I had free weekly therapy for as long as I needed it through this program. And it was absolutely fabulous. But a lot of people wouldn't take advantage of that program. They would just leave the mental hospital and go back out on the streets and do drugs or whatever. Fortunately, that was not my situation. But they don't care. They bring you in and just toss you out. Here's this phone number, call this phone number. I'm fortunate in my situation, but if you're a mentally ill junkie living on the streets, you're not going to call that fucking phone number.
Well, particularly if
how are you going to get to your appointments? How are you going to deal with the addiction? How are you going to, they don't care.
And they probably didn't go into that much detail either about the fact that it was a free program, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, I can't afford that, and they just write it off.
I think, if I remember right, I think it was. Yeah, I think they were, but there was also a very strict no drug policy. And if you did do drugs, they were going to put you in this state rehab. And, you know, that scares people.
Well, yeah, that would.
Whereas I think they should have just forced people into the state rehab. Really. I mean, I don't know. That's a fine line, but.
Well, yeah, it is a fine line. And yet when, you know, during the Reagan years, they decided they weren't going to, you know, keep people committed because, and let's face it, that can be very inhumane, right? That there's problems there.
Oh, what I've seen, my very, very limited thing that I've seen. It's very inhumane because it's like a nursing home. They just keep you fucking there and you just stare into the air.
And then they drug you up to keep you calm.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's a problem with that. And yet there's a need for something. I'm like, can we not just, you know, do better? You know, there's, you know, just dumping people out on the street after an ER visit is not really a good way to go either. I mean, the homeless population, my wife was a social worker for a long time and had a nonprofit, and she helped a lot of homeless people. And I think that it's like, I want to say 40%, don't hold me to it, but a large percentage of the homeless population have mental illness issues. They just can't get help for them, and then because of their mental health issues, they can't really function in the way that this capitalist monstrosity expects you to. So.
Oh yeah, and I see that every day here. This, where I work is across the street from this big homeless camp. And here, I don't remember what year, I think it was Reagan. I think it was that asshole Reagan shut down the state hospital in this area, which was called Agnew's. They shut it down. Basically, all these people got shut out on the streets. There's no place for them to go. And because the store that I work in, anyway, we have a lot of those people hanging out, panhandling in front of my store, in the shopping center, which is fine. But you can tell by the interactions that you have and watching other people and observing, it's not this judgmental thing that a lot of Republicans say, oh, they're just a bunch of young junkies that don't want to work, It's not like that. I see genuine mental illness where these people need help.
Absolutely.
And they're just left on the street. But also they need help where it's not just gonna make their disease progress, because if they're in a home where they're pinned in and you just sat there to ignore, and then you judge yourself, well, at least I'm not as crazy as that person, because you see this person going off the rails and this happening, and then that makes it worse. But there's no treatment, there's no therapy, there's no stimulation, there's nothing to keep you from getting worse.
Right.
And it's just like the nursing homes. I don't care what the brochure says about their activities and their things. 90% of the residents don't go. They don't care. They're too depressed. They don't give a fuck. And half the time these things in the brochure don't happen anyway, because the staff doesn't care, because they're too busy changing diapers. And that's the fucking truth.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do. It's really, really depressing. But that was, at least I was in a situation where I was able to take advantage of the opportunity and get psychiatric care and be on meds. And, I'm in a situation now where I have really good health insurance that pays for both my psychiatry and my therapy. So I'm very fortunate.
So basically what finally has worked for you is ongoing therapy and the right medication.
Yeah. But I have a friend who's dead now, who was, let's just say, brilliant, fabulous, PhD. She had everything going for her. But again, like me, gay, internalized homophobia, sexual abuse at an early age from a relative, in and out of therapy, very bizarre coping mechanisms, which I, won't get into, because, I don't want to out her, even though she's gone, because I love her. But she ended up going to New York, and none of her plans work out. She ended up being homeless for several years in New York, being a complete pillhead. Like, she would call me, and I don't even know how she managed to keep her cell phone on, but she did. The last 5 or 6 times I talked to her, she was so fucked up on alcohol and pills, I literally couldn't understand a goddamn thing she was saying. And she had been in Bellevue in New York 4 times. One time she got picked up comatose. One time somebody called from the subway because they found her in nothing but a pair of panties in the subway station. This guy, I don't know if he'd gone to the cleaners or had gym clothes or something, dressed her, called, they took her to Bellevue. She had no memory of how she got to the subway, had no idea where her clothes went, why she was in the subway in nothing but a pair of panties. But the weird thing is, there was a bunch of opioids and alcohol in her system, no sign of sexual abuse. They did a rape kit, nothing. So God only knows what crazy weird shit had happened to get her in that situation. But that was the that was the third of 4 times she got stuck in Bellevue. You would think after that incident, they would give her some help, right?
Right.
Nope, 72-hour hold, boom, she's fucking out on the street. Nothing.
But they probably had a lot of, okay, so sometimes staff can have a lot of judgments about, oh, she's just a junkie. So, she can just,
I know.
let her go. But that's self-medication. So,
oh, yeah.
all of the so-called junkies and things that are homeless or whatever, they're self-medicating.
I know, and I hated to use that word junkie, because it's such a bad word.
I know, but they're trying to address the issue and the only avenues that are available to them.
Yeah.
So, because I am on an antidepressant, and thank God for that. It keeps me sane. These people who are like, just take a walk in the woods. That's all you need. No, fuck you. I need my fucking pills.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine if you're, a pampered princess with no problems and just got in your fight with your dad. That's fine. Go take a walk in the woods, right?
Right.
That's not most people.
Well, it's not going to address chemistry.
Yeah. And this girl, I mean, she was so brilliant and she just never had a fighting chance.
It's funny.
And her parents rejected her too.
Well, that doesn't help.
And she finally did end up moving back to her home state, which Arkansas, which you can imagine how thrilling that was for her. And her dad was helping her as much as he could, but he was so fed up at that point. And anyway, she ended up dying of an accidental overdose, and she's dead.
Well, it's just sad. It's funny you mentioned how brilliant she was, because sometimes really smart people end up with some mental health problems, and that homeless person might actually have a very high IQ. And it's a fact that a lot of they tend to be men, but not exclusively. When people first have their psychotic break, they're often very smart people. Like we're talking like in college and just doing these high levels of things, and then it just goes to hell because they cannot function to suit this society.
Mm-hmm. And I remember the last time I ever spoke to her, really bad, really, really bad. And she was depressed and she was thinking about trying to end it all. Honestly, I don't blame her at that point, right? But I was really freaked out because I remember at the time she was in New York. It was, freezing cold. And she had all these things about, her stuff would get stolen, going to this shelter, and men would be leering at her, and she'd have to go to another one, and bed bugs, and, the whole fucking shebang, right?
Yeah.
And she was talking about ending it, and and I was thinking, like, she needs to go to the fucking hospital. They need to keep her there. So I called the New York City Police Department, and I somehow managed to get through to somebody, and I was like, this is going to sound crazy, but I'm calling from Texas. I have a friend that lives there. She's homeless. She's really strung out right now. I'm thinking that she's suicidal. And, you know, she had had the same cell phone number for years. And like I said, at least she was able to keep that, right? And they were like, I mean, they're very, very nice to me. But I could also tell that they were like, well, what are we supposed to do, right? And they were like, okay, well, we'll look into it. What's her name? What's her number? And I gave them the phone number, and they were literally like, oh, we know this one. Because she had been in their system. They had to take her to Bellevue. They had to pick, you know what I mean? She was in the system as this character. And they did actually go and check on her. But she refused to go to Bellevue. And then she called me the next day, furious that I called the police on her and tried to get her into the hospital. So what can you do? And they couldn't force her because she refused.
Right.
But at least they went and checked on her, and we're going to take her. But I think they should have forced her.
If she had shown that she was an imminent threat to herself or others, that I think they still could have, but you know, without that, I don't think they could.
I know, but now and then, probably a year later, she's dead. I mean, this was several years ago, but that timeline,
right?
You know?
Well, and it's sad, you know, and you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has discussed this. Why are cops having to perform mental health visits? You know, it's the wrong people for that.
Oh yeah, I know. And like I said, whoever I talked to at the police station was very, very nice. And I'm sure they were nice to my friend because she was like a perky, pretty blonde white chick.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have been a different story if the physicality of it was different. You know what I mean?
I totally do.
Goddamn shame, but that's the truth.
That is the truth. Well, we just don't have any kind of mental health function in this country, and it's still a taboo. You know, You're not supposed to be. You know, there's so much mental illness in my family of origin. I mean, a lot of mental illness, a lot of abusive behaviors, and you know, pathological behaviors, but you know, nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to admit to it, much less that they need help.
Oh, I know.
Instead, I'm the crazy one. Because I'm the lesbian who won't talk to her family.
Oh yeah, and people, and it's like she never says this overtly, but I know that my mom is like, don't tell anybody that you're in therapy. You know, don't let anybody know that you're seeing a psychiatrist or that you're on pills. Yeah, there's this. And there's like, I don't care, and all my cousins and everybody knows anyway, I don't care. But there's very much that, and you know, she has issues from dealing, you know, with her husband and her childhood, and you know, anyway.
Sure.
And I've suggested that she go to counseling, or she go to grief counseling or whatnot. And it's like, oh my God, I would never do that because I'm not going to talk about my business. And there's a lot of people that are that way because they're ashamed.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's just, I don't know. I mean, fortunately, I've always engaged in therapy, but I learned now I need to be in it, because if I'm not in it, look at what happens. I've been hospitalized twice. And if I'm not in therapy and on meds, that's going to happen again, especially now that I'm getting older. And you know what I mean? I'm not going to say it's going to get worse, but it ain't going to get better. You know? No,
yeah. I mean, as a woman, you know, with the hormonal changes, that
yeah,
that definitely required some adjustments on my end.
I had to do that all on my own, because it was literally like, okay, you're gonna go there and you're just gonna sit, and we'll do a token 20-minute session with you. Well, we're gonna give you some pills, and what are you gonna do after? Here's this phone number.
Well, and then there's
Because there is no place to put them.
no, there isn't.
I shouldn't say them, us. There's no place to put us when we're in a crisis mode.
True.
And there needs to be.
There needs to be a better
I
system.
mean, you got cancer, you get treated and you're in the hospital. You're mentally ill or you have an addiction that you go to jail. And that makes it worse.
Sure does.
You know? So anyway, I know I'm preaching to the choir here.
Well, and the reverse is, there's also these treatments or therapies that are now illegal in some places, like conversion therapy and things like that. So it's harkens back to the old DSM, like, oh, well, you're just mentally ill and we're going to fix you. We're going to, convert you back to some sky god normal. And that doesn't fly either. And I don't know anybody, but in recent years, actually not that recent, I think it may have started in the 90s, because I know of a person who was abducted basically from her home for having a drug problem, shipped from the Bay Area to Italy to some reformative school where they basically held her prisoner and abused her for 2 years. And by the way, the parents spent her inheritance money on this, so she got out of there with no inheritance, no money.
And what, they think it was going to cure her?
It damaged the relationship irreparably.
Well, of course.
But that's a thing now, and I can imagine that some LGBTQ kids are getting caught up in that. Like, we're gonna just send you off to flipping Bible camp, and
Oh yeah, and I mean, I know it's becoming less so, but oh yeah, no, that's totally a thing. I know.
Yeah, those people would not hesitate to do that.
And they just kind of, anyway. We won't get into the political landscape now because that's just gonna get worse.
Well, another conversation.
Yeah. Oh yes, but that's just gonna get worse. Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell people, that you may not believe me, but for the evangelicals, The Handmaid's Tale is a good idea that hasn't been tried yet. It's not hyperbole.
Oh, I know.
Do something like that.
I know.
Believe me. So.
And I think there was a little bit of that with, with my friend. There was a little bit of, well, if the more men you fuck, you'll just get over your lesbian stuff. And she actually married a man, but only because he was so obsessed with her, he basically stalked her, and she just gave in because she thought her parents would treat her better if she married a man. Well, and he ended up dying of alcoholism before she died, and the relationship was so bad because it was coming from such an unhealthy place, where he ended up being physically abusive to her before he died.
Yeah, that's not an improvement.
And I blame it all on her homophobic Christian parents.
Yes, I would put a lot of the blame there too. If you're
and her child molesting pedophile uncle.
Yeah. If you know that who you are is going to result in your complete rejection from everything that you know in your life, that's a powerful force. Yeah.
And I've been through it all, alcoholism, rehab, suicide attempts, and it all stems from being, bullied, beaten up, and molested. It's not a good combination,
Yeah, no, it's not.
And I don't consider myself a success story per se, because I still have struggles, but at least I'm alive and I'm happy to have this conversation with you,
I call you a success story.
So, but that's because I did it on my own. If I
Well,
was dependent on help that was I didn't seek out, I'd probably be dead now, you know?
you it is hard for a lot of people to advocate for themselves, unless you're a sociopath and therefore, rise to the top of our society as as happens with sociopaths.
Yeah.
You're kind of taught, well, to be not to be too selfish, and think about everybody's needs, particularly if you're a woman, but I think anybody, before your own. And so advocating for yourself and setting those healthy boundaries again, like, no, I am not going to tolerate that, and I am going to do what I want to do. I'm going to live my life the way I see fit, is critical.
Yeah, and this is going to sound what was a really turning point for me, and this was around that time of that therapist. And you're gonna, when I tell you this, you're gonna be like, really? Which was a really positive thing for me, was reading Ayn Rand.
Oh, you were right. Really? Because of the selfishness aspect.
When
right?
I read her book, The Virtue of Selfishness, I mean, I know it was written from, a capitalist point of view, right?
Yeah, I consider it like a philosophy for toddlers, but yeah, go on.
But at the time, that book, because I had written, I never read Atlas Shrugged. I've never read The Fountainhead, her two biggies, right?
Right.
Because they're just too long and involved, and I just never cared. But somehow I discovered her because I had discovered a play that she had written, and I really liked the play that she had written. Because in this play, God, I'll be damned if I can remember the name of it, but I used this play as my final project in my theater design class. And I had designed a stage set, the costumes for this play, this unproduced Ayn Rand play. Because to me, I saw that play as just such a fuck you to mainstream society. And this is what I want, to fuck you. And that resonated with me, right?
Yeah.
And so I bought her, what is her stupid philosophy called? Objectivism?
I think so.
I had bought, anyway, that little book, The Virtue of Selfishness. Or is it Anthem? No, it's her book Anthem. It's her book Anthem, which is all about the power of me and I. That book really changed my life for the better. It made me realize that I was important and I could say fuck you to people.
Well, that's valuable.
And it was because Ayn fucking Rand, who I do think is a horrible bitch, but I'm just saying, right?
But you found the gold nugget there. Yeah. Yeah. I do. It's true. Standing up for yourself. I think my main problem with Ayn Rand is, can we have some balance with the rest of the world? That you're not going to just fuck everybody off. But anyway.
But God, I'm trying to remember. I remember her book Anthem, very short book, and it's all about I.
Yeah.
But if I remember right, I think she did have a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, right?
I think so, or at least that was something she went
or that was a
about
or something. But anyway, that was life changing for me, which is a really weird thing. So you never know where you're going to find inspiration,
Well, I'm glad that you found that you could, advocate for yourself, because I have known people who are so beaten down that they just cannot assert themselves, or they just have accepted that everyone's going to beat up on them, and just let it. And that is sad. That is sad.
And I wonder if she was still alive, what she would think that some gay boy found his salvation in the combination of her and tarot cards. She'd probably be horrified. Although who knows?
Who knows? I don't know. I think she was such a narcissist that she would just take applause from anywhere. Probably.
She is dead, right?
She's dead.
Yeah, okay. But anyway, that's what I got for you today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think this is an important topic. I think mental health issues matter a lot, and we need to talk about them more, not less. And, you know, I think that particularly for a community like ours, where it's kind of come up in this oppositional environment where, no, you're just not okay the way you are. You know, that's a traumatic, you know, thing.
Yeah, didn't it seem like it was getting better for a while and now it's getting worse again?
Well,
I mean, it's still getting better, I guess.
Well, there's just, you've got the oppositional scaredy
Yeah.
cats, who I think are a significant minority, but they're very loud minority. And,
Yeah.
you know, but remember, the actual Nazis in Germany were a minority too. You know, they weren't that much of the population, but look what they did.
I know.
So, you know, we have to protect ourselves and defend our interests.
Amen. By any means necessary.
Well,
different topic.
That's a different topic. And it's been about an hour. So I just want to say thank you for joining me in this discussion. And
well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
Do it again.
And to my our listeners, please like, share, and subscribe. You can send commentary to rednecklesbian2020@gmail.com, and you'll have a fabulous day.
Yes. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
See ya.